Wonderful. Okay, so thank you for this opportunity to share my work with you. My name is Melissa Garcia, and I am based in the Early Childhood and Childhood Department at Lehman College, which is part of the City University of New York system. Our specific campus is located in the borough of the Bronx, and we are the one senior college in the Bronx. So what I'll be discussing today is the idea of translanguaging in Caribbean children's literature. We will explore themes and language practices of Caribbean children's literature. And because we are situated within a teacher preparation program, thinking about the learning in stories from and about the Caribbean region. So here is what our campus looks like. And so while we're in a very metropolitan urban setting in New York City, we do have a campus that was historically first established, first held the first meeting of the United Nations before they became the United Nations. And so you can find that footage online, but I pair that with our demographics because as you can see, our community is very much Latine, which I will use in place of Hispanic serving institution. And more specific to this collection in our children's section of the college library, we are very reflective of the Caribbean at large. So our collection is one of several. We at our college have been involved in serving a number of small grants to build up various collections. So this contemporary Caribbean children's and young adult literature collection is very much attempting to feature Caribbean individuals that are from the Caribbean as well as the Caribbean diaspora. And we have a number of authors that are located across New York City, but more specifically the Bronx, as well as illustrators. This is an image of what our college library research guide looks like so that you can see the number of different islands that are reflected within the Caribbean children's collection, but in that to the left, the blue tab will also show you other collections that we have accumulated. For example, an identities collection, as well as a nonfiction collection that is centering BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, author and illustrator collection of voices in order to bring their attention to our teacher candidates. So translanguaging in Caribbean children's literature, these are my two co-researchers. One is our educational librarian, Allison Leonard-Quam, and the other is Cecilia Espinosa, a fellow colleague within the Early Childhood and Childhood Department. And our questions that we're pursuing with this specific collection, what stories develop out of an oral tradition across the Caribbean region, and how do the themes and language practices capture a transnational, translanguaging experience? Again, situating these questions within our community. So what forms the Caribbean? When we think about the Caribbean, we want to situate where we are in terms of the archipelago, which are the islands in the center, but we can also examine the coastal cities that form South America, Central America, and North America. I'm going to specifically highlight New Orleans and Florida, where we have Miami, but as well Tampa, in terms of where we are seeing patterns that resonate with a Caribbean culture. So I share with you also a recent exhibition of art, Caribbean Crossroads of the World, that was here in New York and across various boroughs. And again, thinking about the aesthetics of what does it mean to connect with a Caribbean culture across island traditions, as well as language traditions. This is all in our context, leading up to this idea of translanguaging. And so I share with you 3 quotes here that we explore with our teacher candidates in terms of what perception is central to understanding the idea of translanguaging. So these 3 excerpts are informing the approach that we explore in our teacher preparation program that's focused on a pre-kindergarten, so that's age 3, stateside school system-wide, and that goes to grade 6, which is age 12 for our students in the US school system. So this critical lens of translanguaging enables us to see how languaging is fluidly presented in written form as well as performed orally. So these 3 key phrases within these citations that are in bold, the idea of transcending the combination of structures, locating the language, so thinking about context, and to build on my colleague's presentation, this idea of ecologizing language is very inherent to translanguaging. And then from an educational perspective, we're thinking about how the way of the words sound, how they may have different meanings, and how they're working together to build meaning. So in addition to the translanguaging framework, we're also specific to the Caribbean Children's Collection, thinking about the lens of history. And so I cite here Sylvia Winter, who is a professor emerita of Spanish, Portuguese, and African, as well as African American studies. And she is a Caribbean descendant. And she provides us with understanding how a poetics serves to enact individuals to envision new language practices into existence. So this idea of disrupting the colonial structures and cultures that we have across the region. And so moving from her ideas of those various phases historically, we think about the revolutions that interrogate conceptions of what she refers to as the Western man. And so she's building on Frantz Fanon's idea of phylogeny and ontogeny to then sociogeny, right? And so in our work and what I argue, we situate the 21st century reader, young or old, in the center and really landing in this place of humanism. And so one example within our children's collection is the text, Shirley Chisholm is a verb. And so we discuss how the historical significance of who this woman is in American history, right? We can think of as a verb in the way that we're thinking of translanguaging as active and languaging practices as in constant evolution. So this brings us to starting to look at several books that are within our collection and thinking about what are the common themes as well as genres that we're discovering within Caribbean children's literature. So also disrupting and pushing back on this idea of folklore being the main focus of a collection across the islands. And so these 4 texts illustrate various genres and also how genres are being mixed by authors. And so there's a pushing and a bending and an evolution even in the thematic form. So Auntie Luce's Talking Paintings is telling young readers about a child returning to Haiti and her relationship with her aunt. If Dominican Were a Color is very much nonfiction, but it's also interrogating the landscape of the Dominican Republic in language that is present in English as well as Spanish throughout the text. So again, this beginning example of translanguaging is very evident on the page. Clemente by Willie Perdomo is focused on biography of who is Roberto Clemente, and at the same time telling the story of a young boy who's named Clemente. So beginning this conversation of where do I, as the young person, fit within a grander history? And then Under the Mango Tree is exploring friendship in a fiction story, but with very realistic ideas, so that one of the good friends has to leave the island and join the diaspora. So again, coming into sense with these ideas of what's happening in a contemporary Caribbean experience. Here we can see an example of how the Caribbean Children's Collection is preserving cultural heritage. So you may be familiar with who is Louise Bennett Coverley. She's a Jamaican poet that that is still very much central to Jamaican culture and Jamaican diaspora. And you can see here the beginnings of how we're seeing translanguaging present. So within the story, we're having what we would call a standardized variety of English next to Jamaican patois. And so from a teacher preparation program, we're thinking about how do these two language varieties build meaning for the child, and especially the orality that's present, because the young girl at the forefront of the picture is listening to her community. And that's where she then composes her poems as well as songs. So here's another lovely illustration from this same text where you can see translanguaging at play with the words that are behind her. And this quote I just love because she ate them up for breakfast, them being the words that she heard, and she served them with roasted breadfruit and ackee. And ackee is a term that's specific to Jamaica, but if we go to the Spanish Caribbean islands, we would know that fruit as guenepa. And we know that there's also a historical background to the fruit coming from West Africa. So again, thinking about the Caribbean at that crossroads between the region, across the region, as well as the grander globalized context. This is another example of translanguaging at play in Baptiste Paul's book. And here's a quote that I share from Baptiste, where he says, "The use of Creole words adds that joyfulness and makes the story complete." So, for example, one of the words that he includes in his text is bini, for come. And so this is a very early emergent reading picture book, so that we're seeing one word being read at a time, and the words are present in both the Creole as well as an English standard for the reader. This is another example. This is coming from the Dominican Republic, and Alisa Reynoso Morris is the author of both Plátanos Are Love as well as Los Plátanos Son Amor. So she's translated it into Spanish, but we can see that throughout the English version of this text, she's also using Spanish. So there's this idea of translanguaging that's inherent to the story. And this quote that she shares with us, the Spanglish was intentional. And for the sake of time, I'll let you take a look at the rest of her quote. But this idea that we are not just one language, but that we have a language repertoire. So that is very much what we're exploring with our teacher candidates, who very often have not had the space to explore that idea of their own, within their own identities. One further example, Octopus Stew by Eric Velasquez, who also translates it to pulpo guisado. And again, in this text, we're seeing the grandmother speaking with her grandson in both Spanish as well as English, so that the storytelling is enacting translanguaging, and it's very fantastical, but also very realistic in that it's set in a contemporary setting within the diaspora. So exploring this collection, again, returning to this idea of trans languaging being rooted in a location, we are exploring the spheres of influence on a quality of life and thinking about what those 21st centuries look like, 21st century communities look like, and where are we within those communities. The idea of perception, which is also very key to translanguaging, so that we're thinking, how am I perceiving my languages and my languaging practices, and how is that connecting with others that are specific to a location? These are some of the key text qualities that we would then look at in our teacher preparation program as we're exploring stories. And I'll add, very often, these stories that are reflecting our teacher candidates who are coming from different Caribbean island traditions are met with, oh, I never knew there was a story about my island. Oh, wow, this reminds me of home. And so when we begin to look at these key text qualities, we're thinking about our lived experiences as well as the children that we're working with. These are resources and support that we then follow up with in terms of our classrooms and how we hope that our teacher candidates are making use of these texts in their own classroom settings. And I pair that with an image of what our college campus looks like at graduation, because also central to a translanguaging approach is an understanding of a pluralistic society. And Lehman College very much reflects that type of society. So I thank you for your attention, and I welcome questions and comments once we have an opportunity to. Thank you.